My name's Craig Harvey. I am the former Chief of Operations for the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner-Coroner's Office. I retired in 2015, and I worked there for 28 years before I retired. The chief is responsible for coroner investigations and other things.
So the medical examiner would work under you, for example, right?
No.
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 Okay.
Medical examiners are up here on the food chain.
Okay, so over you.
At the time I was working, we had approximately 50 cases a day come in, reported to the coroner.
And what's the criteria? Because not every death obviously has to be investigated by the coroner. What was the criteria for you getting a case?
Basically, the coroner is responsible for any unnatural death, and that includes, accident, suicide, homicide. We get the occasional undetermined, and those are our responsibility to flesh out. In addition to the natural deaths. The natural deaths can occur in people very young as well as people very old.
Sure. Yeah, we know each other originally through our mutual friend Scott Michaels, who has Dearly Departed tours and Dearly Departed, his YouTube channel now.
Yes.
And we did 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, which was my first true documentary about the Mansons. And you provided technical feedback. You went over the autopsy results from some of the Manson victims and kind of gave us, that's where I learned what the word exsanguination means. Mm-hmm. Bled to death.
Bled to death, yes. Yeah. I resonate with the Manson murders because growing up in Los Angeles, that was something that was on the TV every day. And it was just fascinating to me. And then when I got to see Dr. Tom Noguchi come on TV and talk about the murders themselves and what have you, it definitely piqued my interest.
And for the people who don't know, what is the Noguchi's significance?
From 1967 to 1982, Dr. Thomas Noguchi was the Chief Medical Examiner-Coroner for the County of Los Angeles. And he ultimately, right or wrong, got the title of Coroner to the Stars because there were some very high-profile cases that came in while he was in charge of the office.
Yeah, so Noguchi, he did Marilyn Monroe's autopsy. Yep. That's one of the most famous ones he was a part of.
Right.
Which is kind of what got him that moniker, I think, right?
Yeah. He left the office before I arrived. Interesting factoid. Any picture you see of Miss Monroe on an examination table or whatever, those pictures were not taken by the coroner. They were taken by the law enforcement agency before we restricted who could take pictures in the Forensic Science Center.
Well, that raises a really interesting point with my channel, which is Biggie and Tupac focused these days, and that is that there's a very infamous photo of Tupac post-autopsy, and he's got the Y incision still in his chest.
Right.
And he's laying on the table, and that was leaked.
Yes.
To a journalist in Las Vegas, a woman named Kathy Scott.
Uh-huh.
And she published it in a book. She was the first person to publish a book on Tupac's murder, and she was the one that put that out there.
I was shocked when I got it, and the person said, "Here it is." Here, and I don't know what the motive was behind the person. I didn't ask any questions. It was a pretty graphic photo and clear.
And it's very controversial because on one hand, it helped dispel for a lot of people the myth that Tupac was still alive. Because It kind of became like Elvis, people thinking Elvis was still alive. There's a lot of people that still think Tupac's still alive. But seeing him on the table for most people was convincing enough. Okay, he's dead. But also very controversial because it shouldn't have been released. And she has never disclosed who gave it to her.
So you've got people who have access, taking cameras. There were like 4 cameras in that room. So you have different kinds of film. So you've got people taking cameras, and so not just one camera took photos of him.
If something like that were to get leaked from your department, because I think in Vegas there was a big investigation internally into who did it, and people were reprimanded.
In our office, my experience is any time that there's a coroner photo, a scene photo, an autopsy room photo that appears in the media, those are generally received by people who have access to the files that we're required by law to release to attorneys for defense purposes, etc. So like there's a picture of Mr. Michael Jackson that is out there, and that, while it might have been taken here at the coroner's office, wasn't released by the coroner. It was released by an attorney. We used to allow law enforcement to take pictures willy-nilly in the facility. And then after a while, we saw that there's a problem there. And the problem was mostly legal, because we would take photos within the Forensic Science Center. And then the detective takes a photo within the Forensic Science Center. But then the detective attaches his photos to his report, and they go in the murder book, which goes into court. And so then we come in with our written files plus the photographs that we took, and there'll be a difference. And then all of a sudden everybody's up in arms over why is this picture different than this picture. So that's when we said, no mas, you can't do that anymore. If you need a picture taken, detective, you ask our photographer, we'll take the photo for you and make sure that you have it. Because they're going to get a copy of all our photos anyway. But the problem was when things are different, the court has a problem with that.
Yep, of course. And while we're on the subject of Tupac, and the theories that he's still alive, how would it be impossible? Because it all hinges on that was a body double. That wasn't really him. That was someone that looked like him. So aside from the absurdity that you would find a lookalike like Tupac, kill him, put him on the and have him autopsied, how does a coroner confirm identities?
Generally, identities are confirmed by fingerprints, which are considered pretty solid identifications. Depending on the circumstances, sometimes lack of identifiability, we would use dental records, we would use body x-rays, and those kinds of things to do it. But most of the time it's done by fingerprints, and that's considered pretty reliable.
And so you always confirm identity, you don't just take
Every what we call a special processing case, which is a homicide, the fingerprints are taken and the cards are sent to DOJ, and then hopefully we get a hit back on those. Over the course of time, we started using new technology called live scan. And so what we live scanned at the coroner's office went directly to everybody, LAPD, LA Sheriff, DOJ, Sacramento. So everybody was getting the same thing, and that's how most of the identities were confirmed.
So in other words, the Clark County Coroner in Las Vegas would not just take it on faith, oh, this is Tupac. Most likely. I mean, maybe, you don't work for them, so.
Right. Well, maybe if you were tired of being with medical examiner's office, you might take that position. But the coroner is legally responsible for the identification. I'm talking California.
Sure.
Legally responsible for the identification. It's not Tupac Shakur until we say it's Tupac Shakur.
Right. So to people that might be watching this that might still think Tupac is still alive, highly unlikely, unless the entire medical examiner staff was paid off as part of all the dozens of other people that would had to have been paid off,
right,
to do this.
But you're right; it's highly unlikely that he's still alive.
Right.
They kind of did the same thing with Michael Jackson.
Oh, really? You had to deal with that?
Yeah. And then when we get to Michael Jackson, I'll tell you
Okay,
that little tidbit.